It's one of the most extraordinary moments in Britain's history. Prime Minister Boris Johnson refusing calls from his own cabinet to resign. Nine's Brett McLeod is outside the Prime Minister's residence. Brett, the Queen could be dragged into this mess.
Yeah, this is the site of one of the highest wind speeds ever recorded by man.
Arson could be the cause of a fire at the Sydney home of controversial comedian, commentator and YouTuber Friendly Geordies.
Supine protoplasmic invertebrate jellies.
And to get hot, I got hairy legs that turn turn blonde in the sun.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man.
The decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Ukraine.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
Welcome back to the very consistent Fence Sitters podcast. Today, we are back again after another week's break. Sorry about that, folks, but we're back at it again. Will has been, gallivanting around, perhaps joining some cults. I'm not quite sure. And I have been, steadily working my way through my my uni work. But Will, anyway, how are you going today?
I'm very good, thank you. It's a lovely, pessimistically wet and cold day here on the Isle of Arran, as it usually is. So I'm quite happy to be sitting in my little room and talking to yourself. But how are you going, Tiago? Yeah,
I'm doing quite well. A bit of a busy week this week, but we keep going, we keep pushing through, and always glad to get on a call for the podcast, even if I haven't got as much prepared as I usually would.
Oh well.
Today we're going to be discussing some natural disasters. Well, first of all, we'll start with what we're reading. And Will has got a very interesting thing to talk about there. And then to finish off with, we've got a bit of a game. So, without further ado, Will, what have you been doing the last 2 weeks?
What have I been doing the last 2 weeks? So, on the 2nd of September, I left my island home and ventured via ferry onto the mainland with my little car. And I drove the 4.5 hours or whatever it was down to Manchester in England. And I had one night in Manchester where I saw a man called Rory Stewart release his new book. And I then went on to do a whole bunch of other things, which I might touch on in another podcast, and drove further south and went to further events and then drove all the way back up again. But for now, we'll just talk about Rory Stewart. So I think we've mentioned him a few times on this podcast. But he is he's a fascinating man. So he's currently 50 years old, and his portfolio or resume of things he's achieved is quite incredible. So he went to Oxford University. He joined the diplomatic service, so he was a diplomat. He was a diplomat in Indonesia, and he was a diplomat in Bosnia and Herzegovina when Yugoslavia was breaking up. He was also a soldier briefly before that. He then took time out. I think he took 18 months. And by himself solo walked more or less from Turkey all the way to Nepal, which is pretty far.
Yeah.
That's quite the walk. So he walked for about 1.5 years, just staying in random people's houses and whatnot along the way. I think a part of that idea was that he wanted to, as a diplomat, he felt that the politicians and diplomats and the diplomatic service were too abstracted from what was on the ground, and he wanted to really get down and live with the people, I suppose. So he did his big walk. He then came back to Britain again into the diplomatic service and was a governor of a province in Iraq. So when Bush and Blair went into Iraq in 2003, they obviously invaded. They had to separate the nation into sections and create kind of chief executive governors of each section. And Rory Stewart became a governor of one of the southern regions in Iraq. And some of the stories of that in regards to bureaucratic incompetence of people at the top, military generals and politicians not understanding what life actually was like for the Iraqis on the ground and coming up with abstract, nonsensical, jargonistic ideas to try and improve their lives, which would just never work. I think his compound got surrounded by a mob at one point, and he underwent, I think, several days of a siege. And he was only the siege was only broken when an AC-130 Spectre gunship came in and more or less blasted the crowd to try to get them away. And he came back to Britain, and he became an MP. So he joined the good old Conservative Party, and his conservative politics are very similar to mine. He's a very centrist, old school Tory kind of conservative, but quite socially progressive and liberal on some ideas. So for 9 years he was in the Tory party, which is what his book is about, those 9 years in Parliament, which is what I'm kind of going to get to. But then going on from that, he what has he done? He got kicked out of the Conservative Party by Boris Johnson for not voting for Boris's Brexit deal. He then left Parliament. He ran to be an independent mayor of London. He ran to be Prime Minister before then, but he failed in that endeavour, but got a lot further than people expected. He then ran to be mayor of London as an independent, but unfortunately that failed because COVID came in and he didn't have the budget to support himself when the vote got delayed. And now he was the president of a charity which deals with cash transfers to poor people in poor nations, usually in Africa. And now I think he's transferring from president of Give Directly, which is that cash transfer charity, to one of their kind of senior advisors. But anyway, so he's been releasing a book called Politics on the Edge. And I went down to Manchester to see the book launch in Manchester, get a copy of the book, and hopefully to see the man himself. And I touched on this a little bit. It's very, I personally find it very weird when you meet people which you've been researching and following and listening to and reading for years and years and years. When you actually meet them in the flesh, it's quite an odd psychological experience. And I mean, it even got to the point with myself where, like, because Rory Stewart was such a role model for me, I went into the event, like, telling myself that I'm not going to be as impressed as I think I'm going to be impressed, so lowering my expectations so that I'm not disappointed immediately. But it kind of, I don't know, it didn't really work. And I ended up in this weird spot of finding things about him really quite funny and entertaining, but then also this weird mix of like weird things which took me off guard a little bit. And it was that kind of coupled with the pessimistic nature of his book, and I left the book launch, I don't know, just feeling a bit uneasy. And then I went and had a nice large glass of red wine, and then I woke up and we recorded a podcast. But anyway, the book, it's called Politics on the Edge. It counts his 9 years. And I will be quite honest. If you're trying to look for a book that will provide you with faith in our Western democratic system, I would not read it. It's a very scalding review of his 9 years, and it's really quite shocking. So, to start with, kind of at the very beginning, he goes through the selection process of MPs coming into Parliament, And more or less, he got in a very narrow window when David Cameron was the leader of the Conservatives, where David, I don't know him on a first name basis, where David Cameron was trying out these more progressive kind of open primaries to allow more people in. And so Rory kind of got in that weird little window, but that's been shut off now. And it's more or less, you have to be a member of the party, you usually have to be local to your area, and you also have to be, you have to have been out on the doorsteps, putting leaflets through doors year after year after year after year. And I mean, quite frankly, that type of selection can be good sometimes, but often it doesn't allow for diversity. It doesn't allow for professionals. It doesn't allow really for people to work their way up who have a full-time job. I mean, back in the day, political parties used to be very large, broad churches. I think the Tories used to have 2 million members at one point. But now they've only got 100,000, and that's really quite a small pool to pull your MPs from. So that was kind of the first critique. And the second was just a general exposing of how fluctuant the British political system is. So you can either be a backbench MP, which he was for 5 years, or you can be a minister. And so pretty much for 4 years, Rory was a minister, and he was given 6 different portfolios in 4 years. And this is the problem, which is happening again and again in British and sometimes Australian and other kind of Commonwealth-based politics, is that because of these cabinet reshuffles, none of the ministers have enough time to actually sit down and learn their brief, and they're only just getting a hang of things, of running a incredibly complicated, difficult department, and then they get shipped to a next department. So he was the minister in the Department of Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs. He was a minister of international development in the Middle East and Asia. He was a minister of the Foreign Office and International Development for Africa. He was then the prisons minister, and then he was Secretary of State for International Development. So he had all of these different things, and you turn up, you have your first briefing with your civil servants, and then you try to develop some kind of plan, and then before you know it, you're out again, and nothing actually gets done. Which is really quite disastrous, I think. And the most exposing thing, and one of the horrible things reading the book at the moment, it was his time as prisons minister, and just the state of prisons in Britain.
Oh, really?
And their abhorrent nature. So he was prisons minister, and Rory would find, you'd walk into Liverpool prison, say, and all the windows would smash, and the only reason that the windows were smashed was because drones could fly in and provide prisoners with the drugs. So people were actually flying drugs in through drones. There was rubbish in the yard. I think there was one instance where a poor guy committed suicide in his cell and was only found several hours after he committed suicide. The suicide rates in general were relatively high. The number of people intoxicated on drugs were relatively high. And this is kind of all throughout Britain. And every time Rory kind of went to counter this, he found that prison wardens and prison governors were kind of trying to trial all of these more friendly, not specifically rehabilitation focused, but more kind of compromising philosophies with prisoners. And Rory was saying, well, you can't, the fundamental base of our prison system is so screwed up that if we try compromise with the prisoners now, it's not even, we're not even going to start to get better at all. So it was just, and then stories of proper senior MPs who were just not taking their job seriously. He was in the Department of Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs, and so he was looking after the national parks. Apparently Liz Truss, who of course
Yeah.
was Prime Minister for 40 days or whatever.
Brilliant.
She was his boss in this department, and she went something along the lines of, "Oh, Rory, we're going to cut the budget of national parks by 25%." And Rory was saying, "Oh, well, you know, Minister, the national parks are very important to our ecosystem and they're good for the environment. And I've just been doing a whole new action plan with the national park governors, and we probably shouldn't be doing that." And then she was saying, okay, then we will cut the national park budgets by 5%. And then Rory was like, "Well, Minister, if we're cutting them by 5%, we might as not really well cut them at all." And then she said, "Well, Rory, just for you, I won't cut them at all." And like, that was actually like, where's the seriousness? Where's the, you're just throwing around words, and literally you're playing around with hundreds of thousands of pounds, just like that. And yeah, it's just, and you know, like, in regards to that selection pool I was talking about earlier, it means that sometimes professionals and people who are actually really intelligent about their briefs don't get into the right jobs. So there was one point where this guy called Gavin Williamson, who was an ex-fireplace salesman, ended up as defense minister, and all he'd been doing his whole life was selling fireplaces. And simply because he was loyal to the higher ups, and loyalty always overcomes skill, at least in the last few governments. So that's another horrible thing.
Right.
So they kind of, anyway, to round up this big kind of rambling thing about how bad the state of British politics is, and this is what Rory was saying, is you have to expose it first to get to grips with it and then solve the problem. And that's what this book is about. And I'm, in regards to constitutional reform, I'm rapidly more coming towards the idea that Britain actually needs a constitution to start with. So I didn't think this before, but I think I've talked to Tiago about this before, and listeners might not be aware that Britain itself doesn't actually have a proper written constitution like the US, Australia, Canada, New Zealand has. It's kind of got a large number of pieces of legislation and legal texts and age-old kind of historical texts, which are all combined into this weird mishmash of a British constitution, which back in the day was quite good because it made it very flexible and could adapt to things. But these days, with this new kind of populist age we're living in, people can take advantage of this. So, you know, I think we need some kind of written constitution. We need mass devolution, perhaps on a federal level, similar to what you've got in Australia with, you know, local, state, federal. Because we've got local in Britain, we've got, you know, federal. We've kind of got state in regards to Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, but then England doesn't actually have that intermediate position.
Oh, right.
But then, yeah, it's weird. But then in that intermediate position, even in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, sometimes that's quite lackluster in certain aspects as well. We need to reform the House of Lords. We need a new voting system to try, a voting system probably based on the more proportional representation of New Zealand, which I think works quite well, to try and flush some more new energy into the political parties. Rethink the tax system. I mean, the whole thing needs to be redone.
Well, my question would be then, how do you go about doing that?
Well, I mean, I think I think the whole way to go about doing that is by getting a decently charismatic, you know, ideas-led, energetic leader to come in with a big majority, and with that majority behind him, justify all these changes, which is kind of what Tony Blair did when he came in with his landslide majority in 97. He created the Supreme Court, he devolved the governments, he reformed the House of Lords. What else did he do? He denationalize, or he I don't know the economic side of things, but he did something with the Bank of England. He did a whole range of massive things, and he could have gone further, really, but he didn't. So there is precedent for someone coming in and radically changing the whole constitutional output of the UK, and I think that desperately needs to be done.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Mr. Stewart is saying as well.
Well,
So there you are.
well, on the other, maybe a more, not to get too pessimistic, what are the chances of a change like this happening in the next
Um,
10, 15 years?
well, I could see it maybe happening in the next 10, 15 years.
Is there
I
sort
mean,
of
it's.
sentiment amongst the British people in general that something like this needs to happen, or is it just sort of?
I think. I think there's a massive sentiment amongst the British people that Britain is broken and is
Yeah.
and is breaking more. In regards to inflation, in regards to the economic stagnation, in regards to the tax system, in regards to a whole lot of things. But they don't. I think if you go down to average Joe blogs on the street and say we need a mixed member proportional representation divided into 2 lists based off the New Zealand system, they're going to be like, what? So I mean, I mean, what I'm kind of trying to say is the average person on the street knows that Britain's broken and sees all the day-to-day things as to why it's broken.
Yeah.
But you need the more abstract political things to be solved so that those lower down on the street things could then be fixed themselves.
Which is why you need the charismatic leader for people to get behind and get interested in.
Yeah, and then bring through all those reforms, which is what Tony Blair was. And at the moment, we don't have any charismatic people. They're all just yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well.
But what have you been reading or watching, Tiago?
Well, have you heard? I'm gonna get this up so I don't get it wrong. Cormac McCarthy.
Oh yeah.
He's one of the great American writers. I didn't know any of this until a couple of weeks ago when I picked up this book. And I've been reading a book called Blood Meridian. Have you heard of this one, Will?
I've heard of it. I don't know much. Well, I don't know anything really about it. But
so this is like a very controversial is not the right word. I guess it is controversial, but it's debated upon whether or not this is one of the most beautifully written, fantastic pieces of literature in American history.
Oh, really?
Or if it's just sort of a lot of shock value and fluffy language.
Okay.
If you know anything about Cormac McCarthy, is he doesn't write in like a standard way that we write in English. He doesn't use quotation marks. He's got paragraphs that will run, not paragraphs, he's got sentences that will run on for pages and pages, just endless adjectives describing things, all this sort of stuff. It's kind of like if you were to give someone who knew nothing about English all of the rules to the English language without giving them any examples to look upon. That's how I would describe how he writes.
Okay.
So this book is set during the American-Mexican War, which is a war.
Oh.
I don't know if you know anything about it, but
I do.
Well,
that's a very specific historical event, which I didn't expect to be. So it's set in the American-Mexican War.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Very good. I mean, are we going to talk about the American-Mexican War?
Well, from my understanding, is the southern states in America weren't originally part of America. Rather, they were sort of colonized by America as part of Mexico. And this book.
So California used to be all Mexican. And Texas as well, and obviously New Mexico, so it's you look at a map of North America in like the early 1800s, and Mexico is just huge, and then that's when you have because Texas was its own country for a little bit as well.
Yeah, I think so.
And then you have the Alamo and everything, and it's a fascinating little bit of history. But anyway, so it's set during that period of time.
It's set during that period of time, and it follows this. He's just called the Kid. He's never given a name. And I'm only about halfway through so far, so you'll have to bear with me. And it's quite difficult to follow. As I said, lots of long-running sentences where you kind of forget what they're even talking about, whatever happened. And he leaves home at 14, and he just goes out into the I mean, what you'd think of as like the Wild West, you know,
The
cowboys.
West, yeah, right?
They call them Indians at the time and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And you just follow him as he joins the army, and his whole like group in the army gets completely destroyed. So he walks out and eventually ends up with a group called the Scalpers, which were real groups of people that would go round to towns or whatever, and they would kill a bunch of people and then take their scalps as a reward. It was made up of like, you know, criminals from colonized America, as well as you know, Native Americans that have been displaced, as well as Mexicans have been displaced. So all like the, you know,
Wow.
the mishmash of all these terrible things
And
happening
it's
to
just a
different
gang,
people.
is it?
And it's just a gang that go around. And this was a real phenomenon. It's like really horrible.
Yeah.
But this book, it follows that and his journey with that, and you sort of watch as he slowly loses his humanity. Well, not really slowly, but as he progressively gets more and
Rapidly.
more terrible. And
Yeah.
then there's the big antagonist, I guess, in the book, who's called the Judge. And the Judge, I've heard a lot of people talk about, and I can probably back this up, is one of the most evil characters I've ever read in fiction. He'll go around and like, this is how the book opens basically. There's a priest and he's giving I don't know what you call it, sermon. And the judge walks in and everyone looks around, and the priest, the judge goes, "That man's a fraud. He doesn't have he's not licensed to, you know, do priest things, and also he's a child pedophile." And then everyone chases out the priest and kills him. And then later in the bar, they're all sitting around drinking, and then they're like, "Oh, so how did you know the priest?" And he was like, "Oh, I never met him. I made it all up." And then they laugh, and that's how the book opens.
Oh my god!
Wherever this judge character goes, a lot of people end up dead. He kills babies, he kills children. There's one bit where, I mean, close your ears if you're not into baby murder, but he grabs a baby by the leg and he smashes it against the rocks because he's frustrated. So it's quite a brutal read, really. Which is why a lot of people say, is this really a good book, or is this like murder porn or like gore porn? Because there's a lot of that sort of stuff in there, but there is also a lot of like really good descriptive language, ways of describing things that you would just never think to describe, like how you would describe things like that. So if you're looking at wanting to read something a bit different, and you've sort of you're not too worried about getting queasy or grossed out, because there's a lot of stuff in this book that will challenge you. I would recommend it. It's definitely very interesting, set in a very interesting time, about really terrible people. There's not really any good people in this book. And
I was going to say, is there any empathy for the kid at all? Like, is there any humanity, or does he just get worse and worse? Is there a good guy? Is there any sense of justice, or does any character be good at all?
As I said, I'm not really at the end, but there is this, not the priest character from the beginning, but there's this other priest who seems like the judge is kind of the devil on the kid's shoulder. And then there's this other priest character who's kind of the angel who's trying to lead him down a better path, but he just kind of gets worse and worse. And there's like a lot of reading into it that you can do. Some people say it's all like a Christian parable, because they're saying that the boy is a metaphor for humanity, the judge is a metaphor for the devil, and the priest is a metaphor for God. And then there's like a bunch of ways you can look into it, which I'm keen to do once I finish the book, because it's interesting. Sorts of things in it. We're about halfway through. Shall we move on from what we're reading?
Sure. There we go. Yeah. So to move on. I have got some rather sad. Move on to more depressing things. There have been some rather sad events in the world, which I thought we should alert our viewers to, or listeners to, because, well, I mean, I suppose the Western media have been paying them some attention, but I mean, it's interesting to get into anyway. So, there was recently some floods in Libya, and I say some floods. These were really quite catastrophic. So this was last Sunday on the 10th of September. There was a storm in the Mediterranean called Storm Daniel, which more or less became Cyclone Daniel, and it was really quite a massive storm, and brought through far more rain than Libya is ever really experienced. And in the town of Derna, which is kind of eastern Libya, 2 major dams pretty much broke under pressure up the river from the town. And 30 million cubic meters of water were then released. Yeah. And it's quite incredible. You can go online and you can look at like pictures of before and after. And the difference is just absolutely catastrophic in regards to how much disaster and destruction this water has caused upon the city of Derna. And currently, I mean, to put it into context of numbers of dead, there is at least 12,000 people currently thought to be dead from these floodings. The mayor of Derna was putting it anywhere between 10,000 and 20,000, and there's about 10,000 to 100,000 people missing. 2,200 buildings have been flooded, and it is just, I mean, it's catastrophic. Cars were picked up and just tossed down the road. Trees were taken up. I think there was one person who was found like 11 nautical miles out to sea. That's how far. So you can kind of you're on the coast. The floods come from inland because the dams were inland, and they just pretty much pushed everything out into the ocean. And so cars and bodies and trees and structural houses are just floating along in the Mediterranean. And you think, oh well, that's, I mean, yeah, absolutely catastrophic. But to make matters worse, I was looking into Libya's political situation, which I didn't really know anything about. And I doubt many of our listeners do either, but it's actually a very fragmented place. So Libya is actually currently divided more or less into two states. So have you heard of Colonel Gaddafi, Tiago?
Oh yeah,
maybe no.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, Gaddafi. So he was a long-time dictator in Libya, and he's got his kind of military cap and his sunglasses and whatnot. And under him, life in Libya was, I mean, your rights were incredibly restricted. There was no voting. There was no very minimal freedoms. But because of the stability in that regard, Libya was able to take advantage of its oil supply and became a very rich nation. And education was free, healthcare was free. It was actually one of the best places in regards to living standards in Africa under Gaddafi. Anyway, he was disposed in 2011 in the Arab Spring, and immediately Libya kind of collapsed in on itself. And there was kind of a NATO intervention. So Western forces came in with the French and the Italians and the Brits. Obama, rather interestingly, chose to abstain and didn't go in himself. And you look at Libya currently now, and it is more or less divided in two. So the West is NATO-backed. It's being run by this guy called Abdul Hanil Abdul Hanil Dabiba, I think is his name, and they're based in Tripoli, and they're called the Government of National Unity. And then they're more Western. And then in the East, you've got, get ready for this. In the East, you've got a government which is called the House of Representatives, and they're backed by Egypt, the UAE, and Russia. So the House of Reps is backed by Russia, and they're being run by this guy called Osama Hamad, who's the Prime Minister of the House of Reps.
Yeah.
But the idea is that really, this guy called General Khalifa Haftar, who's this military strongman, he's really the guy running the things in the East. So you've got, House of Reps in the East, you've got the Government of National Unity in the West. They have been fighting for years and years and years. They've kind of come to a stalemate now. And so Derna was in the East, and because of these political divisions, there was simply a lack of investment, a lack of response time. The mayor of Derna, or the authorities in Derna, when the storm was coming through, they actually put in a curfew and forced everyone to stay in their homes. So when the floods came through, it was just carnage.
So they couldn't escape.
They couldn't escape. So yeah. So I mean, it's just another, like we were saying with Niger, and with those other African countries, it's this increase of natural disasters in politically intense climates, which are just horrible for the world. We also had some fun in Morocco. So in regards to Morocco, that's less politically unstable, but this was a few days before the Libyan floods. On the 8th of September, there was a 6.8 magnitude earththquake. And that was up high in the Atlas Mountains. But all in all, there was about 2,946 people killed, and then 5,674 injured. And that was that was up in the Atlas Mountains. It was 71 kilometers southwest of Marrakesh. And again, horribly tragic. Obviously not as disastrous as Libya, but still quite bad. And Morocco is interesting because it doesn't have earthquakes that often. And the earthquake was up in the Atlas Mountains, and I was doing some research, and there was this fascinating article by Reuters, I think it was, and they had this diagram of the Moroccan mud brick houses, the traditional Moroccan mud brick houses, and how they just completely useless in regards to being structurally integral when an earthquake comes through. So with a mud roof, stone kind of rock base, mud bricks which have been left to dry, forming the walls and whatnot, and they're great for regulating heat. They have a massive cultural, historical significance to the Moroccan people. But yeah, when an earthquake comes through, they more or less just collapse into a pile of rubble, which isn't great. But there you go. There's that's what's been happening off in Africa for a little bit with that.
Is there talk of any sort of Western aid? I mean, obviously there'll be something, but how big of a push do you know?
Yeah, there's been a fairly large push with Western aid. So the Spanish were the first, because Spain and Morocco have a close relationship. The Spanish were the first professional teams on the ground in Morocco. I think it was Morocco actually refused to take in German and French support. I'm not sure what the reasons for that were, but it's obviously there must be some kind of political motivation going on there. And then, in regards to Libya, there is a decent amount of Western support there as well. And even with that whole divide between East and West, the Government of National Unity in the West were actually sending supplies as well. So there's ideas that perhaps, although the flood is terrible, there might be some kind of crisis which the West and the East can unite over.
Do you think that could, if they do sort of come together to try and fix this, there would be better relations between the East and the West after?
I definitely say so. But again, I'm not enough of an expert on the Libyan domestic politics to comment on such a thing. But so I suppose that pulls all of that to a close, to a rather tragic close. But
I'll see if we can find any sort of organizations or something that people can go have a look at, and then link it under the video maybe. Because any bit I'm sure will help someone. So good stuff. Now, Will, if you're done with that,
yes,
are you ready to play a game?
I sure am. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. We're playing a game. I don't know what I've signed up to here.
So this game, well, I haven't given it a name, but let's give it one now. This is it a real extravagant political party, or did I make it up?
Oh, wow.
So basically, I've got 5 names here. Some of them are real political parties from anywhere in the world, and then some of them I just made up. So
Okay.
I'll ask you, you guess. I'll tell you if you're right. Oh no, actually, I'll ask you, you guess, and then you can get an extra point if you can tell me what country that political party's from.
Okay.
And you get an extra point again if you can tell me one of their policies. So,
Right.
are you ready
Jesus.
to begin?
Sure am.
The first one is the Banana Republic Advocates. Is this real or fake?
That's real.
Okay, tell me a bit about them then, Will.
Are they in America?
Well, we keep going.
Okay, Banana Republic Advocates. They're in America,
Yep.
and one of their policies is everyone gets a banana tree.
Unfortunately, they're not real. As great as that
That's
would
not
be,
real.
they're not real.
Okay.
Okay, the next one is the New Millennium Bean Party.
How am I supposed to know any of these? This is ridiculous. The New Millennium Bean Party. I don't think you would have come up with that, so I'm gonna say that's real.
Yeah. Where's it from?
America again.
And what's
Actually no, let's
okay.
let's say the New Millennium Bean Party. They can be from Canada.
Okay. And what's one of their policies?
Everyone who was around at the turn of the millennium is given a free bean.
Okay, you are right. They are a real party, so that's 1 point for you, Will. They're actually from the UK.
All right.
They were started by Captain Beanie. His real name is Barry Kirk, but he always went by Captain Beanie. And they're actually a party that was purely made to raise awareness for a child's charity.
Oh wow! Very good. What was the charity?
It doesn't say. It just it says.
Great. Great. Really raised awareness, didn't it?
It says that once he broke the world record for the most time spent in a bath full of beans. So that's another interesting fact about the Millennium Bean Party for you.
Very good.
Okay, the next one is the Afternoon Silly Party.
Afternoon Silly Party. No, that does sound kind of real.
Okay.
I'm gonna say that's in Britain again.
Mm-hmm.
And you're allowed to do anything silly after 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Unfortunately, the Afternoon Silly Party isn't a real political party.
Did you make that up?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Okay.
Are there 5 of these?
Yeah, so what's
we've
that?
We've done 3.
We've done 3. Okay.
Oh, I'm not doing very well, am I? I've got 1 point.
Next one is the Party Party.
Yeah, that would be real, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to give you a clue. You're right, it's real. It's somewhere in Europe, but it's not the UK, Italy, or France. Because otherwise, there's no chance you're going to get this.
I mean, there's still quite a few countries left. The Party. I mean, is it? Well, it's not going to be Germany, is it? I don't know. Spain.
Unfortunately, it's the Netherlands. Again, I'm not sure how you're supposed to get that one.
I don't know how I'm supposed to get any of these. I don't know.
And give me one of their policies, Will, and make it as extravagant as you want, because the more extravagant, the closer you're going to be.
everyone is allowed to party 24/7, and the government will fully supply all party supplies through taxes.
You're not far from the truth. This party condoned doing publicity stunts and even requested to have stunts have stunts done during a party that could lead to public safety concerns made illegal. So, party, I guess.
And then is there one more?
There's one more. Let's have a look. Okay. We've got the birthday party.
Yeah, that's real, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, actually, it is?
Yeah.
Okay. Australia.
No, unfortunately not.
Is it Britain again or the US?
It's the US.
Okay. And it's everyone's birthday all day, every day.
So this was a third party started by Kanye West.
That's what. Yeah.
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 I mean, think of the Republicans' talking points, and that was the birthday party. So there you go. That was wacky.
Interesting if Kanye ran a party these days with what he's been saying.
The Nazi party.
Yeah.
And I just bonus round, Will. How many parties around the world do you think are called specifically the beer party?
11.
12, actually, Will.
Oh.
Hey, I'm going to give you that as a 12 extra
bonus
points for 12 beer parties.
Thank you. There we go. Look at that.
Oh, well. You actually did. You did all right. I mean,
I'm going to have to come back with a quiz to get you out next episode, then.
God, there's some fantastic ones here, Will. Let me just read you out a couple more. There's the party, which is an Australian party. There's the
monster raving loony party, of course, is the classic British example. Yeah, with like Lord Buckethead and stuff. I don't know, but they always stand in parliamentary constituencies with important people. So there's like Theresa May standing next to like a guy with a trash can on his head, or there's Boris Johnson next to like a guy dressed up as Elmo on the stage when they're announcing the results. That's a very great British tradition, a monster raving loony party.
There's the sun-ripened warm tomato party. Unfortunately, they're defunct. And of course, last but not least, the Church of Militant Elvis Presley party. That's in the US.
They're probably genuine. The Church of Militant Elvis in the Deep South.
Oh, thank you for watching this episode of Fence Sitters. If you enjoyed what you heard today, tell your friends about it. Give us a like. Do all that good stuff. Any closing thoughts today, Will?
If you get depressed about the state of the world, just look at random made-up political parties.
They're not made up; they're real.
Okay, and joking, comedic political parties.
Yes, and if you get more depressed from that, make up your own funny little ones. That would be even better. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Maybe we'll do voice next week.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, I think we need.
And to get hot, I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man.
The decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Ukraine.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.